Hey Internet, this is Gunter with MiniMishaps Games, and today I'm going to be giving you 7 tips for printing acrylic paint onto 3D printed objects from an extrusion printer. So we have our pizza chef here, and as you can see, 3D printed and painted with some caveats, some learning chances for us, and some this is going to be how we lay out our tips here. So there are a ton of things that can go awry with 3D printing, and a tons of things that can go awry when you're painting miniatures. Today we're going to just take a look at what happens when you try and do both of those things. So we're going to start right at the top, talking about painting objects white that are 3D printed. I'm going to recommend that you paint on top of whatever color it is, even if it's the same color as the extrusion plastic, because the plastic will yellow at a different rate than the paint will. So even though I used white 3D print filament, I went ahead and painted white on top of the chef's hat portion anyway, so that it would be constant throughout as the miniature was going. It also, everywhere you paint is going to add a little bit of stability, and we'll talk about that later when we get to our elbow. Next up, this is probably the one that's going to be the most frustrating if you haven't gotten this tip list, and that is layer face. When you 3D print faces, the options are print the layers like this, and they have a very linear stacked face, which makes it difficult to put details on because the paints and things, if they're too thin, will bleed and run along the 3D print lines. So my recommendation for faces is that you go back with a really small pen and do the faces, because that way you keep from, or really thicker paint that's not going to run, because your faces, or leave them blank. A lot of times on the 3D printed pieces I would just leave them blank as well. Next up, we're going to talk about flat planes, and in this case it's a pizza, and even though it's painted this way, it was originally a little bit larger, but any flat plane that, especially if they taper to the outside, is going to struggle with detail and struggle with your print lines. So this could be a shield or a weapon, this could be a piece of a cape or something that has the flat planes, and really the best thing that you can try and do is 3D print it a little bit at an angle, because no matter which way you print it, it's going to have a grain going through it, and if you have the option of reinforcing with like a thermoset plastic or something, that would be especially good. And as extra important on this next part, which is the print grain. I've got it at our elbow here because I tried on this miniature to find the obvious point of breaking, which is right actually at the bottom of the pizza there, because the thin part of the arm, the grains of the 3D printing run this way, so they're going to break along those lines, and that means she'd just be armless and pizzaless. So here you want to, if you don't have access to a liquid plastic or a liquid adhesive or a hot glue gun or any kind of liquid adhesive like that, you want to paint thick and paint lots and lots of layers, because the paint drying will add a little bit of cohesion across those points as well, and saturating the plastic at those points, making sure that the paint gets in and around and between the layer lines, will make sure that you have the least chance of breaking there. Next up, we've got our hands and details, and we're going to talk about For this, in this quality of miniature, I recommend not doing the washing because the details won't show along the design lines, they'll just show along the print lines. So if you wash, if we had washed this character with like a black or brown wash, because normally you would do that to try and make the fingers and face and belt buckles and the detailed parts kind of pop out a little bit more. This will instead just make the hand and arm look like it's made out of Legos, because the paint and the wash will just run along those print lines, and in this case they're long steps in a vertical stack, so you'll lose things like fingers if you try to wash your minis. So my recommendation, again, same with the face, is if you need those fingers to stand out more, is to go back with a fine pen, something like that, that won't run along the layer lines. So that brings us to wicking in general. So you can see here that it looks like the green is sort of in a camo pattern, which I love how that it turned out that way. It was a complete accident, and it may influence my decision on whether or not to put more layers. But just know that paint, especially a water-based acrylic, is going to wick inside the 3D print. So there are points where it will settle, and there are points where it will pull inside and cover in the inside. And so where you have it pool here is where the camo pattern appears, is that it's only pulling it into the plastic in some places, and those places are pulling the paint away from the surface. So you end up with this blotchy light and dark. So this can be adjusted by painting really thick paint, and this is actually dual benefit, because you would also fill in a little bit those 3D print lines, or just doing lots of layers until those wicking points, those wicking catalysts, close up with paint, and then it'll paint normally like a miniature that you would be used to otherwise. So this is one point where the wicking actually helps us. You want to make sure not to paint the bottoms of the feet or the claws or whatever it is, whatever your miniature is going to be standing against the base, because then whatever adhesive you use will also wick up into the plastic, and that will help your miniature have some structure at the point it connects to the base as well. So this has been 7 tips on using acrylics with the extrusion plastic 3D printed models. And if you like what you see, we have got, you can like and subscribe. We've got Patreon set up, and next week we will be back for our spooky paint challenge. We'll be painting up a banshee and talking about black and white with painting miniatures. Hope you'll join us for that. Thanks for partying with us, and we'll see you in the next video. Thanks, Internet.